Russian occupiers killed Ukrainian prisoners of war. They targeted the colony in temporarily occupied Olenivka using artillery. Immediately, the Kremlin propaganda media spread a fake story about alleged strike on the facility by the Ukrainian armed forces. The general staff called it an outright lie and a provocation for which Russia, an aggressor, occupier and sponsor of terrorism, was responsible.
The Russian occupiers pursued their criminal goals, thus to accuse Ukraine of committing war crimes and to hide the torture of prisoners and shootings committed there by the orders of the occupation administration and the command of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the temporarily occupied territories of the Donetsk region, from a statement by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook.
Killed and more than a dozen wounded. Russia shelled a dormitory area in Mykolaiv using cluster munitions. The epicenter of the attack was near a public transport stop.
Please be very careful. You see, yesterday and today they are shooting in the daytime, when we are just leaving and doing some civilian scenes. Be careful, keep an eye on the air alert, look up, and let's see how it develops.
Russian occupiers shelled Sloviansk in the Donetsk region. There are wounded. The city is partially without electricity.
The city was shelled again. The morning of Friday, July 29th was not very kind for Sloviansk. The city was shelled again. Many apartment buildings in the center of the city and houses in the private sector on Pivnichna were damaged. One person was wounded, likely a rocket attack.
New facts of Russian war crimes against Ukrainians. It became known about the violence against a Ukrainian soldier by a Russian soldier. Advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Mikhailo Podolyak, confirmed this information and called for a detailed investigation, promising revenge.
Russian Federation propagandists delightedly showed how a group of Russian tyrants crippled Ukrainian captive. World has to realize Russia, a country of cannibals who enjoy torture and murder, but the fog of war will not help to avoid punishment for the executioners. We will identify and get to each of you. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, on Twitter.
The enemy combat units suffer significant losses, therefore the Russian military and political leadership is trying to replenish the ranks of the units with personnel in a hurry. According to Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine Hanna Malar, the aggressor country is intensively mobilizing representatives of the far-right paramilitary organization, Russian Imperial Movement.
A special cynicism of the Russian propaganda narratives consists in the fact that in order to implement the goals of the special military operation and denazification of Ukraine officially declared by the Russian leadership, they involve forces that openly follow the neo-Nazi ideology and are on the list of especially dangerous terrorist organizations.
The threat of missile attacks from Belarus will continue for the next 3 months, but the probability of invasion remains low. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The situation in the Volyn, Zhytomyr and Kiev directions is under control.
Since the beginning of the month, the enemy has fired 198 shells from the territory of the Russian Federation, of which 47 were fired on the Chernihiv region and 151 on the Sumy region. Not a single settlement was left behind by the enemy's rockets or artillery ammunition, the weaponry of the so-called Liberation Army, in the directions of the offensive, and in some settlements there are no residential buildings left at all. This is how Russian troops continue to bring Russian world into the villages and towns of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, destroying schools, kindergartens and hospitals, leaving local residents homeless and absolving them of their right to exist in a civilized world.
In Kherson, the Russian military captured a passenger ship that was moored on Karantinny Island. They used it to cross the Dnieper River near the damaged Antonivka bridge. They also arranged a pontoon crossing. The police of the Kherson region opened criminal proceedings. In Mykolaiv, a Russian shell hit the yard of a private residential house on Thursday, July 28th. As a result of the explosion, the wall and part of the roof collapsed. 2 neighboring houses were significantly damaged. 3 people were wounded. The enemy attacked the Nikopol and Kryvyi Rih districts of the Dnipropetrovsk region at night. 6 private houses and household buildings were damaged by grenades. There were no casualties.
A power line was damaged. A few thousand residents of the private sector in Nikopol were left without electricity. Electrician crews are working at the site. In the Kryvyi Rih district, the enemy shelled the Zelenodolsk community with artillery. No casualties and damage were reported. Valentin Reznichenko, head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration, on Telegram.
The Russian army attempted to advance near Avdiivka, Krasnohorivka and Velika Novosilka, but suffered losses and withdrew. The main enemy efforts are concentrated on gaining full control of the territories of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. The Ukrainian military successfully repulsed assault and offensive actions.
Ворожі штурмові та наступальні дії у напрямку
Enemy assault and offensive actions in the direction of Vershina and Semigirya were successfully repulsed by our soldiers. The enemy is trying to conduct offensive operations in the area of Novoluhansk and Solidar. The fighting continues. Enemy combat reconnaissance in the directions of Vodyana and Pisky resulted in losses and retreat. The enemy attempted to advance in the direction of Avdiivka, Krasnohorivka and Velika Novosilka. It suffered losses and withdrew. Ukrainian aviation and rocket and artillery units continue to hit enemy strongholds and accumulations of manpower and equipment.
Russian troops made no significant territorial gains after the armed forces of Ukraine withdrew from Lysychansk. According to the Washington Post, this was Russia's only significant strategic success in recent months. According to Institute for the Study of War analyst George Barros, the Kremlin will soon have to admit its inability to fully capture Donbass. Reported by Roman Smolar, Natalia Hayevska, UATV News.